Hello and welcome to another edition of Social Value Always Matters, our short video series. I'm Ben, I'm Chief Executive of Social Value UK and Social Value International. I'm delighted to have with me Peter Holbrook today, who's Chief Executive of Social Enterprise UK. Hi Peter.
Hi Ben, how are you doing?
Very well, thank you. Thank you for sparing your time. I know how busy you are at the moment. So we'll jump straight in really. And Peter, what we're trying to do with these interviews is just talk to leaders from different sectors to share stories of how you've had to react to the coronavirus crisis. And I think particularly people working in social enterprise will be really keen to hear how you and your organisation has responded.
Gosh, I mean, it feels like such a long time ago, even in reality, the fact that it was probably, just a little bit more than a couple of weeks. I think I take great pride in the way in which we have responded, both as a bunch of individuals coming together as a team at SE UK, and also the decisions we've made prior in terms of investing in digital remote working, really strengthening our culture, which has enabled us to take some initiative steps into more flexible working for staff anyway. And so it felt like a kind of probably it was catalytic for us. It has forced us to fast track our digital strategy, our kind of home working, flexible working strategy, all of those things. But more so, I think what we've done and tried to do is both establish the most appropriate networks that will most benefit our members. And that means through convening groups within the social enterprise community. We were on a Skype or a Zoom yesterday with many of our colleagues looking at the specific consequences on social enterprise and the specific lobby needs for both government, but also in terms of funders and investors and other communities. And then we've also been obviously bringing together the colleagues from Northern Ireland, Scotland and Wales. We've been heavily involved in maintaining good communications and supporting the efforts being led by NCVO and the charity sector community, and we'll continue to do that. And deal with, as you might imagine, quite an overwhelming number of very specific member inquiries about very specific circumstance. And so as well as adapting to this kind of new world order and reality, we've been trying to be as fleet of foot as possible in terms of getting really practical content out for our members as quickly as possible so they can navigate the government schemes, so they can understand what's available and what are the best routes open to them. Obviously, we've been rushing around capturing evidence. I know there's a lot of research going on out there at the moment, but that's because we've been pressed by government for it. And we need new live data to feed in to affect policy and to help influence government decisions about the nature and the shape and the accessibility of these funds. And so we've been doing research, we've been doing practical support. And now I think in kind of week 3 or week 2, week 3, it feels like it's certainly week 3 for me, beginning to look a little bit beyond the immediate crisis to what this means for society, for work, and what it exposes about issues like inequality, work insecurity, the relationship of company and society. It opens up a variety of really, really ongoing important questions, but perhaps brings them into ever greater focus. And so trying to get our heads around that. So yeah, when I replay it back to you, it sounds like it feels like we've been busy. I hope we've not just been busy, but that we've also been productive and useful and added something to the inevitable white noise that's emerging out there on social media and through comms channels.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. We've definitely been in a kind of reactionary phase and firefighting phase. And that's been a phrase I've heard used. And you've got such a wide membership base. Social enterprises is so big in the UK. And yeah. I think you've been fantastic in recognising that there is a risk that the government support packages, initially for businesses, and then we hear there's one of the big charities that social enterprise might fall between. Is that what you've been trying to protect against?
Well, initially, I think our work with government and BEIS meant that when the business support packages came out, they were announced in such a way that broadly they would meet the needs of most social enterprises, particularly those smaller ones with less than 250 staff. I think quite quickly, though, we began to see some perversities emerge as our members started feeding in news and information about how they were affected and the trouble they were having in navigating some of those schemes, or even just getting in touch with their banks, for example. So it's certainly, we've been driving into a lot more detail. We've been looking, for example, at how the small business grants that are being made available in most parts don't apply to the sector. And actually, a small shift in government policy would avail that availability to charities and social enterprises that are trading on high streets, that are trading in communities. And those small things that government could do quite quickly to make it easier. But at the moment, I think, my reflection would be, even our colleagues in DCMS and in other parts of government have been saying they're having very little traction with government and the Treasury themselves. And so it's good to see a mix of policy development, research, engagement, but also a degree of campaigning too. And I think we're going to need to do a bit more campaigning in the coming weeks, as well as feeding in the research and the evidence, and keep, the principle of practical, ongoing, useful guides and insights, evolving and coming. I do think, we where possible, we have to get through this. But more importantly, or just as importantly, we also have to get ready to come out of the other side of this. The world will be altered, and through this journey there will be huge losses and costs, but there will be some great opportunities for the sector too. I firmly believe that.
Well, yeah, that's great. So let's now turn our gaze to the future and the next phase. And we've had a few chats already about how we need to start thinking about the narrative and getting the right tone about this is actually an opportunity. And that phrase, let's not waste a good crisis, and let's use this to kind of build back better. And that's a phrase I've heard as well. What is it that you are learning, or we're seeing now, that we can learn from to kind of shape the future? Is there anything particularly around well-being and inequality that we can build into the future?
Well, I think what it really does is lay bare for many, 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 many more people, ordinary citizens in this country, the harsh reality of inequality, actually. So inequality isn't just borne out by the fragile nature of people's incomes and, that famous kind of notion of only being one paycheck away from bankruptcy or insolvency. But I think it also really exposes the inequality. So I've spent a lot of the last 2 weeks Zooming, Skyping, Google Hangouting with all sorts of peers from across the sector, and most of those are CEOs or people in senior positions of leadership. And it really does strike me that we're all working from home. We've all navigated with our Macs and our iPads back to our homes. And when you look at people's homes, you see that we live relatively comfortable lives. And what I think it has also exposed is, what does it mean for those people that either can't work from home, who have no option, who have just lost jobs and have to wait weeks and weeks and weeks for any sort of government support to materialise. And those families now, in terms of the housing crisis, that are having to kind of isolate in accommodation that has never been fit for young families, let alone during a period of enforced self-isolation. So I think the housing inequalities, the very nature of some people being protected in employment, and I'm very fortunate to be in that situation. My job for the short term at least is secure, versus those people who have seen absolute disruption in their lives. And I think it really does expose the kind of division in society between those who are now part of a very unsecure world of housing, employment, income, and those that are part of the fortunate part of the old world normalities, where we're salaried, we've got some level of security, even if not indefinitely, but we have roofs over our heads and we live relatively comfortable lives. I'd love a bit more space in my flat. It feels a lot smaller now. I'm having to spend so much time in it. But when you think about the lives of people living in cramped conditions and what that must mean for young families with children, I think that's what it's exposed. The final point, and I know this is meant to be a brief interview, so forgive me, but that's about our ability to mobilise. And I'm overwhelmed by that the speed at which the world, when it needs to, has been able to adapt and change in unimaginable ways, frankly, within a couple of weeks. And I think there's a lesson there for about how we can, if we choose to, how we might mobilise around issues like climate change and around growing inequality, and how we can mobilize also about the kind of relationship between business and society. We've seen some great examples of businesses stepping up from all parts of the private sector and the social sector and the charity sector. But we've also seen some businesses, you know, on one hand push out, like Easy Group, 167 million pounds of dividends out to their shareholders weeks before making all of their staff redundant. And so I think it has really exposed all sorts of kind of chronic weaknesses and challenges that we now have to resolve with much greater speed if we're not only going to tackle the you know, evident consequences of the pandemic, but also of all of those other issues wrapped up in the SDGs.
Yeah, absolutely. And that kind of does lead me to my final point, which maybe you kind of answered, but it's really about leaving everyone on a high with a bit of hope, because we are living in quite scary times, and it's we all have moments where we're panicking and feeling fear, but we are seeing, you know, the best of humanity as well. And as you said, you've seen collaboration on levels that we've not yet seen before, and that's fantastic. Are there any other anecdotes that you can share with people, like within your membership or your team, or just your community, that has left you feeling with a bit of hope for humanity?
Well, you know, I can draw upon like a million inspirations from across the sector. As you well know, there are outstanding organisations facing extraordinary pressures in terms of cash flow and finance and business uncertainty, but are still mobilising their local communities, finding a role that they can play and contribute, and being extraordinary. But I just think, you know, for me, there is a real heartening that this pandemic is a great leveller. As we've seen, it can affect anybody and anyone. It doesn't just attack those on low incomes, and it threatens just about everybody in society. And therefore, I think it has brought some aspects of, you know, community back together again. Social solidarity, the way that communities are mobilising and supporting each other, I think is really, really inspiring. We've also seen, as I say, some you know, less positive behaviours, but overall, I think, you know, it reinforces that sense that, you know, we can't take for granted what we have. Everything that we have is so fragile, and it takes very little to change everything. And for me, as a great internationalist, it really drives home that message that, you know, not just as a nation, but as a species, we are all in this together, this pandemic, and we're all in climate change together. And the more that we can see common cause, the more chance we've got of solving those big issues that will ultimately affect and potentially destroy us all. So, you know, I think, you know, I don't know whether that's I tell you what, I saw a brilliant
destroy us all.
I saw a brilliant home video this morning that one of my colleagues shared, and it was from a Facebook share. It's got 3.6 million views, and it was a family reposing and redeveloping lyrics for Les Miserables song with their family around being locked down, and it was just the best thing. And I was in the bathroom this morning, sitting on the loo, which I probably shouldn't do, watching Facebook videos. It really brought a tear to my eye, and it was just gorgeous. So yeah, there's joy in every moment of every day still.
We've got to sort of take joy, absolutely right, and never take for granted anything again. So thank you so much, Peter. That's been great to hear your views. I'd just like to say thank you as well for personally, you know, the collaboration we've been doing over the last few weeks. And I'm looking forward to working closely with you and others over the next few weeks, months and years as we, you know, try and learn from this and create the world we want to live in.
Yeah, it's an absolute pleasure, Ben. Likewise, it's been great working with you and your colleagues at Social Value UK. And just one thing, remember to wash your hands.
Thanks, Peter. Speak soon. Bye-bye.